started writing the plan, we read very widely about what other countries did and what the results were. And one of the more impressive examples of national planning in recent years, you cannot ignore China, and you cannot ignore what Deng Xiaoping has done in China. So we studied that in a fair amount of detail. It doesn't matter what the nature of the economy is. What really matters is whether this economy can address the two twin evils of South Africa, which is poverty and inequality. It is investments in human capabilities that we have to make so that our society can take advantage of opportunities, the so-called human development approach. I think implicit in the National Development Plan, and this is the part that we as commissioners are still very disappointed about because it doesn't come through sufficiently in society, and it's maybe because of a lack of culminating the plan into a social compact. And that is that this generation has to realize that if there are certain sacrifices we have to make to advance the next generation. The last issue that I can say broadly about the plan is that the only way that this plan is going to find traction is when we take leadership through active citizenry. The real issue is that this is a plan for all of society. It's the plan of all the people of South Africa. It's not the plan of a ruling party, of a cabinet, of government, or of politicians. It's everybody's plan. So to effect the plan, you can have some leadership that comes from government, but mostly every individual citizen has a responsibility to activate any part of the plan. But ideologically speaking, there are roughly 4 ways that you can redistribute. Okay? You can take all the money in the country and redistribute it. It's one thing you can do. Say, now we've given so much money to this group and that group. The other thing you can do, you can redistribute the assets, and the best example of that is housing. We've done exceptionally well in redistributing housing. It comes with its own consequences as well, but that's another way of doing it, and we've done that. The third thing you can do is you can broaden the reach of quality education, the so-called human capital investment, redistribute human capital. Or you can, finally, you can create work for unskilled people. And our economy, the nature of our economy is that you have a surplus supply of unskilled, low-skilled, semi-skilled people. It is easier to redistribute money and redistribute assets. You decree it and you do it. It is more difficult to broaden the reach of quality education because it takes time. Often takes a generation, if not 2, and it's more difficult to create jobs for unskilled people. But the greater impact lies at what is more difficult. In other words, in broadening the education and creating jobs for unskilled people. The biggest critique against the National Development Plan has been against the economics chapter. And I thought I'd share with you what the nature of that was. The main contestations on the economic chapter revolves around the issue of economic transformation, and that involves ownership of assets, wealth distribution, access to opportunities, and the structure of that economy. It seems, whilst the National Development Plan makes this argument for human capital and creating jobs, that this is not sufficient to keep the dialogue going. There's a need for some kind of magic beyond just jobs to ignite people and get them together in forums like these to talk about where do we go with this plan. And that magic will have something to do with the question of transformation. There are 5 key contestations, and it's around the ownership of the economy, the nature and extent of job creation, macroeconomic policy, industrialization, labor market reforms, and land reform. The core criticisms are 3 in terms of those 6 issues. The first one is that we are focusing on the wrong sectors. They say that we don't place enough emphasis on the sectors that will re-industrialize South Africa. Manufacturing, mineral processing, value adding, and so on. It says that jobs in manufacturing in utilities and infrastructure are more appropriate to meet the current challenges than jobs in the service sector. There's an argument that growing service-based sectors is critically dependent on growing industrial sectors, and the NDP has not prioritized the growing of these industrial sectors. So the big argument about industrialization or reindustrialization is still out there, and what the nature and extent of that would be. A second core criticism is around reforms of labour markets. Labour market regulated reform does not boost entrepreneurship, and it's entrepreneurship, big or small, that will fuel the economy. The private sector says that the NDP is a bit too soft on labour and the required structural reform. So you can see this contestation within the labour markets. It says there's an incorrect focus for government spending. The NDP is too conservative on macroeconomic policy, and it advocates for monetary policy easing and more fiscal restraint. The critique from business is easier. We should focus more on creating conducive investment for climate and growth, aggressive regulatory reduction of regulatory impediments. ICT investment must be a key infrastructural priority, not just another sector. Investments in labour productivity to enhance global competitiveness. I think that speaks for itself. The critique from Labour, again, needs attention. It says jobs that will be created will be largely of low quality, it will be unsustainable, too little emphasis on reindustrializing the economy. Wealth distribution is insufficient if 50% of the population by 2030 share 10% of the wealth by 2030, because this is the implication of the NDP. The poverty thresholds are too low. We worked on 425, just too low. Agreed. Definition of unemployment is too rigid. Not 25%, it's more like 36%. We should expand the definition. The tendency to regulate markets, Labour doesn't like, of course. Raw mineral exports says will not continue, which we are beginning to see, of course. And land redistribution without compensation is still out there. I'll conclude with this. Now, having said all of that, there is critique, and I think that the next phase, the new Planning Commission, will probably begin to address precisely these core criticisms of the economics chapter. Back to the issue of active citizenry. Whilst much of the attention might go to discussing things further, the real attention should be on implementing things. And as the Planning Commission, we've always said, let's not spend too much time on the things we disagree. Let's start spending more time on implementing the things that we do agree about. Nothing is perfect, and there will always be some disagreements. And led by the private sector, there's been a number of engagements that of note, and I just thought I'd mention three, but there are many more. The engagements on land reform closer to my area. There are certain proposals about how this can be achieved. Private sector, together with government, have taken the lead and say we're going to identify the land that needs to be transferred. We will buy the land that needs to be transferred, and one day when government is ready, they can buy it, and we will keep it in production. And there's 3 or 4 initiatives, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Western Cape, that has gone ahead and run ahead of government to a large extent. Low-cost schools, probably one of the better examples. And not only low-cost schools, but zero-fee schools are gaining traction throughout the country, and low-cost schools in impoverished areas are achieving exceptional results. My best engagements in the 5 years and the latter days of the Planning Commission has not been engagements like these. It's been engagements with young people on campuses, at schools, youth organizations who are engaging the National Development Plan, not about the ideological differences and critiques of the plan, but really what does the plan mean for them by the time they enter the job market. And I say this because I think much of our efforts should not just be about engaging business leaders, engaging political leaders, social, but it's rather to engage the youth and activating them to start owning, understanding, and implementing parts of the plan. Thanks so much.